What's up, boys? How are ya? Wednesday, May 22nd, last DWG of the week. Why? Well, probably because I'm going to be talking to you guys, most of you listeners and viewers on the weekend. So wrap it up, and I got a busy Thursday, Friday, traveling, dropping kids off everywhere, every corner and nook of the province before I get a little slice of free time. So let's get right into it. Last night, we'll start with the show. How about that? The NHL has its Stanley Cup final matchup that they've been looking for. 1970 rematch between the Boston Bruins and the St. Louis Blues. In 1970, the Boston Bruins swept the St. Louis Blues, which shouldn't come as a surprise because St. Louis at that time was only 2 years old or 3 years old. And back in the day, they had 12 teams. The original six were in one division, and all the new teams were in another. So they were guaranteed to have a younger franchise in the Stanley Cup final. So a bit weird, but nonetheless, both teams very deserving. Both teams have some superstars. Both teams have some grit. Both teams have a goalie who has been up and down through the playoffs a little bit, but for the most part battles through. Much like very reminiscent of maybe the first year that LA won the Cup and Jonathan Quick came on the scene. Jordan Binnington, Bin Nasty as he calls himself on Twitter, has had himself quite a playoff. And Tuukka Rask, who gets a lot of flack for Bruins fans, has had a really, really good playoff. He stood on his head the last two rounds. And, you know, for all the pundits who say that Tuukka Rask can't win a cup, he's in the final. And it's actually the second time he's taken a team to the final. So there's not a huge list of goalies who've taken a team to two Stanley Cup finals and aren't in the Hall of Fame. I would say there's probably 3 or 4 tops. So hats off to both teams. The NHL Stanley Cup final begins next Monday. So St. Louis gets a full 6-day break to rest up, and by the end of the week, it'll look like Boston has about 10 days. Storylines, I'm trying to think of, you know, we got the St. Louis Blues, who were last place January 1st, are now in the Stanley Cup final. That's a storyline. In terms of players, probably I don't know if it's the biggest storyline, but maybe the subtitle storyline is David Backes. So David Backes obviously plays for the Boston Bruins, but he was a longtime player and captain for the St. Louis Blues. And should the St. Louis Blues win, that would be a tough pill to swallow for Mr. Backes, who, by and large, really was a good foundational piece for that team for a long time, and taught a lot of those guys who are there now how to be leaders. It's also, when you look at some of the players, Jay Bouwmeester, a longtime St. Louis Blue and NHL veteran, who hadn't had a lot of playoff experience up to this year, is now facing himself to win a Stanley Cup. And I would figure that if he won the Cup, he'd probably retire. He's 35 years old. Time to put her away. Tyler Bozak, ex-Leaf. There's a guy that has an opportunity. He signed as a free agent for St. Louis, and he's got an opportunity. Ryan O'Reilly, who was basically shipped out of Buffalo because he hated to lose, has now got an opportunity to put a ring on his finger. And boys, if you're in the London area this summer, you keep your head on a swivel. You don't want to have a truck just drive through a Tim Hortons or anything with the cup in the back, because you'd be partying. There'll be a lot of selling. In terms of local flavor, not a lot other than, you know, Ryan O'Reilly, obviously. London area, there's usually a guy on every team from the London area every year. There's a cup parade. But not a ton of other local flavor. I mean, it's a shame the San Jose couldn't go through. They were just too banged up. Jumbo Joe didn't get his cup ring this year, and you got to wonder how many more chances he's going to get. Logan Couture had an unbelievable playoff, and was just a little bit too short. Erik Karlsson was really banged up. The big question is, does Erik Karlsson re-sign with San Jose, which might make sense, or does he actually test the free agent waters? Perhaps, we know that he's very interested in Tampa, but if that's going to happen, Tampa's going to have to ship out some guys. Ryan Callahan, Tyler Johnson, maybe Alex Killorn. They're going to have to move about 4 or 5 pieces just to sign Braden Point and Erik Karlsson, which could happen. And there's a lot of teams in that boat right now where they're under the cap gun. So you're going to see a lot of players move, hopefully. So that makes it an exciting offseason. So we got our Stanley Cup final. Early prediction, because Boston has home ice, could play a factor. Both teams are rested. I had St. Louis in my NHL playoff bracket pool to go to the final. I thought that they were a team that just could play you any way. They really could. And Boston, I would think tends to lean on a bit of the heavier side, a little bit of the slower side. I think Toronto exposed their speed through that series, and I think St. Louis can win a game in Boston. This is going to be a good series. I think it's going at least 6 or 7 games, and it could be decided by a couple overtimes. I will throw my support behind the St. Louis Blues. The franchise has never won a Stanley Cup, and that would be really cool. The over-under for John Hamm getting a camera shot in the Game 3 of the St. Louis home game, I'm going to put the over-under at 6.5, because John Hamm will be in the building. He's born and bred St. Louis, big Blues fan, and star of Mad Men. So they're going to have the camera on him like they did when Chicago was doing their runs. I wouldn't be surprised if they even interviewed him. So there's always a famous person. If it was LA, it was Will Ferrell, and if it was Chicago, like I mentioned, it was what's his name there from the Wedding Crashers, Vince Vaughn, big Blackhawks fan. So, and of course Snoop Dogg when it was 2007 in Anaheim and all that stuff. So John Hamm will get his camera time, and we'll move on. In terms of Boston, they're going to be healthy. They're going to be good. They're really good. But I mean, finally, we have a player who can match up really well against Bergeron and is probably going to negate anything from that first line, and that's Ryan O'Reilly. He is going to eat up Bergeron. It's going to be a great matchup to watch, but he is like Bergeron 2.0, probably the 2 best all-around players, forward players in the league. And St. Louis's defense, I mean, holy smokes. When you look at what they have, Joel Edmondson is just a dog on a bone. Parenko is a beast. I mean, their 6th defenseman is Vince Dunn, who's a good player. Used to play for the Niagara Ice Dogs. There's your Q McGuire stat of the day. Bouwmeester is a good, solid player. And then up front they got some gamers. Braden Shen, former Philadelphia Flyer, he's a gamer. Tarasenko can put the puck on his stick, and he's like Ovechkin. He can change a game in a heartbeat. We mentioned O'Reilly. Just up and down that lineup, they can play you anyway, and I think St. Louis is going to come out on top. And I'm going to say it's St. Louis in 6, because the St. Louis Blues fans deserve to raise the cup at home. So St. Louis in 6 is my early pick. We'll see how it goes. In the NBA, the association, I had mentioned that if the Raptors didn't get off to a good start last night, they were going to be in trouble because they were going to be tired. And boy, did they ever come out. And I'm telling you, that was the best Raptors game that I've seen them play in a really, really long time. And, you know, we mentioned that Gasol tired. We mentioned that Kawhi Leonard was banged up and tired. And you saw that. But what was more impressive, obviously they got the bench points last night. Powell had another great game, and for a young player like that to be making shots and then come back and have another great game, that's huge for his confidence because it's all about mental at this point, and that's great for him. And then Fred Van Vliet, who's really been struggling essentially since last year when he had the shoulder injury. He was the most consistent three-point shooter for the Raptors until near the end of last season when he had that shoulder injury, and he's never really recovered from that injury. He hasn't had a great year. He had an okay year, very serviceable year, but he hasn't been consistently lights out. And for the playoffs, he's been virtually invisible. He's had a couple real good defensive games where he's got it done, but last night, 13 points for Van Vliet. They really needed him and Powell. Points off the bench. Ibaka's had a really great playoff. I would say aside from Kawhi, Ibaka's probably had the best playoffs of all the Raptors, most consistently at least. And so they got lots of bench points last night. And I think what was just so awesome to see was, even though Gasol might be not knocking down shots, if you take a look at the top of the key, he's getting the ball. And Kawhi's often drawing a couple defenders, and while Kawhi is drawing defenders, and mind you, he's very injured, so he's limited on how he's doing, Gasol is reading the defense, and he is basically looking at plays that Kawhi can get his points without being taxing on his body. Those guys their basketball IQ is just unreal. And so they were picking apart the Milwaukee defense last night because Gasol was reading defenses, dishing the balls, and then of course you can read defenses all you want, but you're truly not going to win until you hit shots, and they were hitting shots. Powell went off. That place was rocking, maybe the loudest I've ever heard a building, the ACC, in any sport last night. They were just, when they were dropping threes, it was just unconscious, and Milwaukee was getting rattled. And then on the defensive end, they're smothering Giannis, who it looks to me like every time he touches the ball, he's traveling. He's getting favorable calls, he's getting favorable non-calls, but they're smothering guys. And if he's not able to get out, if he's not able to penetrate and then dish out, and if those guys aren't hitting, and I think Toronto, with the coaching they have, it looks good. The hard part now is they are so banged up, like I said, and we're only into game 4, and now they got to win 2 of the next 3. One of them has to be in Milwaukee, and I guess game 1 is what hurts the most now, because had they locked it down in game 1 and got that win, we could see a Raptors team who is up 3-1 and in the driver's seat. But to me, Milwaukee's still in the driver's seat. There's no momentum carried from game to game. There is a mental clarity, but Milwaukee's really, really good in that building, and those Milwaukee fans, they are loud. They're great. They're really good fans because they don't have anything else to cheer for. The Brewers suck, and they live in Milwaukee. I mean, if you lived in Milwaukee and you didn't have much to cheer for, what the fuck is in Milwaukee other than baseball and basketball? There's nothing to cheer for. Winter? You're going to cheer for winter? There's nothing. So those fans are they basically get up for Bucks games in the playoffs and deer hunting season. So they're going to be loud. And it's going to be tough. It's going to be a great game on Thursday. I'm working Thursday night. I'm working Saturday night, game 5 and 6. And then game 7 on Monday night. The problem with, even if Milwaukee wins the series, Toronto's taken a bite out of them, tired them out enough that, let's say this series goes 7 games. Well, Milwaukee and Toronto, especially Toronto that's going to be older and banged up, got to finish out a series on Monday night. Then they got to turn around. They got to drive, or they got to fly to the West Coast on Thursday night, which the NBA Finals start next Thursday, May 30th. So they're going to be 3 days rest versus 12 days or whatever the hell Golden State has. And they're going to be tired and banged up, and they're going to be on the West Coast with the time zone change. So, you know, it's going to be exciting for Toronto fans to get an opportunity to go to the final, or even Milwaukee fans to get an opportunity to go to the final. But 3 days rest, and then going on the West Coast, playing against Golden State, who's been to the final 5 times in a row. Get your brooms out. That's all I can say. They're going to have a healthy KD. They'll have rust. If there's any game that an Eastern team's going to steal in the NBA Final, it's going to be Game 1. But outside of that, once Golden State warms up, it's over. It's over in 5. 5 tops. And if Toronto goes hobbling into Oracle on next Thursday night, and they lay an egg and they go down by 20, enjoy Game 3 and 4 in Toronto, because that's all you're going to get. AHL last night, Charlotte Checkers spanked the Toronto Marlies, and that series is a 2-3-2 format. So it's 2 more games in Toronto, but because Charlotte won that game, that's a huge advantage. And you got to think Charlotte's the favorite now, especially considering even if Toronto wins the next 2, they're going to have to win another one on the road. Game 6 and 7 in Charlotte. I got to say Charlotte's probably going to go to the final. And then at Memorial Cup, we got more action going on, and we'll figure out who's going to be in the semifinal and the final coming up here shortly. So that's all I got for DWG today. For those of you that are going to be in the London area on Saturday, we'll see you. For those that aren't, I'll catch up with you soon. I'll talk to you later.